Have you ever felt like your organization is constantly playing catch up, struggling to adapt to a world that just keeps getting faster and, well, less predictable? It's like we're caught in this permanent storm of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and, VUCA,
Hmm.
where the traditional ways of doing things just feel brittle, slow, maybe even irrelevant sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. It's fascinating, isn't it? How many organizations are still basically operating on a blueprint from like the 17th century, designed for a stable, linear world that frankly just doesn't exist anymore. And the climate has completely shifted. So trying to solve today's, these really complex VUCA challenges with yesterday's tools, well, like Einstein said, it's kind of futile, right? That traditional business model is so rooted in control, mechanistic hierarchy. It often architects fragility, not resilience.
Hmm.
It's becoming obsolete.
Okay, so if that old blueprint isn't working, what does? This deep dive is all about quantum leadership. Now, I know it sounds maybe a bit abstract, maybe pulled from science fiction, but as we'll see, it actually offers a profoundly concrete, actionable framework, a way to not just survive constant change, but maybe even thrive on it. And this isn't just another buzzword, right? It's a fundamental rethink of the organization
Hmm.
itself, moving from that static machine idea to more of a living, adaptive system.
That's the critical question, isn't it? If your organization behaves less like a predictable clockwork machine and more like a dynamic, probabilistic quantum field, then how do you lead it effectively? This is exactly where quantum leadership comes into play. It provides the underlying why for so many of the things that actually work in modern organizations today. You could think of it as a kind of meta framework. So practices like Agile, with its iterative cycles and self-organizing teams, they're basically engineering solutions for dealing with quantum-like uncertainty in dynamic networks. In emotional intelligence, too, you could almost see it as the physics of managing the entangled relational energy within a team. By understanding these core principles, leaders can grasp not just what works in this modern world, but why it works. And that understanding lets them architect organizations that aren't just reacting to change, but are actively thriving in the middle of it.
Right. So our mission today in this deep dive is really to give you a shortcut to understanding this, well, pretty revolutionary idea. We're diving into the strategic blueprint for becoming a quantum leader and, importantly, architecting a truly future-proof organization. Hopefully, you'll walk away with some surprising facts, maybe some practical insights on how to navigate this permanent state of flux, and crucially, how to lead within it. Okay, so for centuries, the corporate world has largely operated like a giant, meticulously engineered clockwork machine. You know the picture. Assembly lines, clear chains of command, everyone knowing their precise function, like a cog. Just a small part in a predictable system. This basic model, it's largely rooted in 17th century Newtonian physics, right? And then it got formalized by Frederick Taylor's scientific management in the early 20th century. It views the organization as this predictable thing where if you just understand the individual parts, you can control the whole thing. And let's be honest, it worked remarkably well for a long time, especially during the stable industrial age.
Well, absolutely. That Newtonian mindset was tremendously successful in its time, no doubt about it. And it manifested in, well, rigid hierarchies. The focus was absolutely on top-down command and control, ensuring compliance, making sure everyone followed the process. The highest value was placed on certainty, predictability. That led to this obsession with meticulous long-range strategic plans, those classic 5-year plans everyone talks about. Detailed budgets, smart goal-specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely, all designed to eliminate ambiguity, stamp out any deviation, create these highly optimized systems, and the ultimate drivers, often very narrowly defined metrics, efficiency, profit, optimizing output, minimizing cost. In that model, employees were often seen as, well, interchangeable parts, resources to be managed and controlled. Leadership was largely transactional, based on incentives, performance appraisals, but in the face of constant, unpredictable change, like we see today, that very rigidity becomes not just a weakness, but a profound liability. It engineers organizations that are brittle, slow to adapt, and fundamentally they just can't foster the creativity and innovation needed to survive, let alone thrive now.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What if your organization isn't a machine at all? What if it's more like, I don't know, a forest or a complex organism, constantly adapting, evolving, everything interconnected? And this is the core shift that quantum leadership introduces. It draws its inspiration not from classical physics, but from 20th century quantum physics and, importantly, the insights of complexity science. People like Dana Zohar pioneered this back in the 90s. This paradigm shifts the core metaphor of the organization away from that static machine towards a living system.
Exactly. This model pulls directly from complexity science. It understands that human social systems, companies included, are fundamentally complex adaptive systems, or CAS. Think of them as living systems, self-organizing, adaptive, constantly evolving. And this isn't just a nice metaphor, right? It's actually a more accurate scientific description of how modern organizations really function. They aren't static structures. They're dynamic fields of energy and relationships. And when you truly view your organization as a living system, you fundamentally change how you lead it. You have to. You move away from that impulse to control, towards a philosophy more like cultivation, nurturing, the attributes of a quantum organization. They're dramatically different. It's seen as an indivisible whole. Everything is connected. Those rigid departmental silos, they get replaced by deeply networked, flexible structures that actually help the free flow of information and energy across boundaries. And instead of being controlled from the top down, quantum organizations are inherently self-organizing. They empower individuals and teams with high degrees of autonomy. They trust intrinsic motivation, creativity. In fact, any attempt at rigid top-down control actually destroys that natural adaptive capacity. It stifles it. And crucially, this quantum paradigm recognizes that uncertainty isn't something to be eliminated. It's a fundamental feature of reality. So quantum organizations don't try to fight it. They learn to thrive right at the edge of chaos, that creative space between rigid order and total randomness. That's where complex systems are most innovative and adaptable. The binding force here, it isn't rules and control. It's a shared sense of purpose, a vision, shared values. Leadership then becomes focused on inspiring and aligning that collective energy towards a higher shared goal.
So thinking about this, what kind of organization are you in right now? Do you feel more like a cog in a machine? Or maybe a co-creator in a living, evolving system? And what about the leaders in these quantum organizations? To lead in this new quantum way, it seems like just being smart isn't enough, is it? You need a different kind of intelligence, a whole brain approach. We're talking IQ, EQ, and something called SQ.
That's absolutely foundational. Look, cognitive intelligence, IQ, is still essential, right? For analyzing data, structuring arguments, navigating complex information. What Zohar called serial, linear thinking. But it's profoundly insufficient in this quantum paradigm. IQ helps you understand the parts, sure, but it often fails to grasp the interconnectedness of the whole system. Then there's emotional intelligence, EQ. That's the capacity to be aware of, control, express your own emotions, and handle interpersonal relationships, judiciously, empathetically. In a quantum organization where interconnectedness and relationships are everything, EQ is simply non-negotiable. It's the intelligence that lets a leader genuinely foster collaboration, build deep trust, create psychological safety. It helps manage those complex emotional and energetic dynamics within a team. But it's spiritual intelligence, EQ, that really sets the quantum leader apart. This is what Zohar calls the ultimate intelligence of the quantum leader. It's the capacity to access and live from our deepest meaning, our vision, our core values. EQ is what drives us to ask those fundamental why questions. It's the source of a leader's deep sense of purpose, their humility, their capacity for compassion, and their commitment to service. A leader with high Q. They know what they truly believe in. They understand what genuinely motivates them, and importantly, their people. And they can connect the day-to-day work of the organization to a greater purpose that inspires and energizes the whole system. Quantum leaders draw on their SQ to nurture a higher collective intelligence. They put their whole selves, mind, heart, and spirit to their leadership.
Wow. It really is a complete flip from that old mechanistic view, isn't it? I mean, if you just look at how these dimensions contrast, the core metaphor shifts from a predictable, controllable machine to a dynamic, evolving, living system or ecosystem.
Exactly.
The underlying science moves from 17th century Newtonian physics to 20th century quantum physics and complexity science. Structures go from rigid hierarchy and functional silos to flexible networks and self-organizing teams.
Total transformation.
The mindset shifts from control and certainty to influence, possibility, embracing uncertainty. Employees are no longer cogs to be managed, but intrinsically motivated, creative agents, co-creators of value.
Yeah, a huge shift in how you see people.
Strategy becomes adaptive, emergent, not fixed, and top-down. Key metrics shift from just efficiency and short-term profit to things like value creation, resilience, innovation, well-being, purpose.
A much broader perspective.
Authority moves from position and command and control to influence, trust, shared purpose, expertise, and leadership's focus. It moves from managing tasks and enforcing rules to cultivating potential, facilitating flow, and inspiring vision. It really drives home just how fundamental this paradigm shift is. It touches every single aspect of an organization. Okay, this is the part I find really fascinating. We're talking quantum physics, but obviously not literally applying formulas to spreadsheets, right? So how do these, let's face it, pretty mind-bending concepts from the quantum world actually translate into practical insights for leaders? Let's start with superposition.
Right, superposition. In physics, it basically describes how a tiny particle, like an electron, can exist in multiple states or places at the same time. It's a blend of all its possibilities until you actually observe or measure it. Yeah. The key idea here for leadership is the potential and the nonlinearity it represents before you force a definitive choice. So in leadership terms, it means moving beyond that rigid either thinking that traps so many organizations. A quantum leader, using this idea, can hold multiple, often seemingly contradictory ideas or strategies in mind at the same time without feeling the need for premature closure. So instead of forcing a decision between, say, optimizing for cost or innovating for growth, the quantum leader asks, okay, how can we do both? They don't see them as mutually exclusive choices.
That sounds incredibly powerful, like a way to break through those traditional deadlocks or false dichotomies. You're saying it fosters a mindset that constantly looks to expand the options.
Precisely. This approach encourages nonlinear problem solving. It allows teams to explore a much wider range of possibilities before they commit resources or shut down avenues. It cultivates an environment of, well, immense creativity and strategic agility. It transforms ambiguity from something scary, a threat, into a resource, something to be explored. The core insight really is, quantum leaders don't just choose A or B, they explore A and B simultaneously, and often that's where the really creative solutions and strategic possibilities lie hidden.
Okay, interesting. Next up, entanglement. A lot of us have probably heard of quantum entanglement, that spooky thing where two particles become linked and measuring one instantly affects the other no matter how far apart they are. Einstein famously called it spooky action at a distance. How on earth does that resonate within an organization?
Well, in an organization, entanglement is arguably the most powerful metaphor we have for systems thinking. It illustrates that an organization isn't just a collection of isolated individuals or departments acting independently, no. It's a deeply entangled web of relationships. Everything is connected and influences everything else, often instantaneously. This means that, say, a change in policy over in finance, or maybe a shift in attitude in a sales team, or a new process rolled out in operations, it'll have ripple effects, often unseen, across the entire system, instantly. So this principle, it kind of mandates the active dismantling of those functional silos we talked about. And it pushes for cultivating what you might call a connectivity quotient, a measure of how well people, teams, ideas are actually interconnected. It forces us to build true collaboration, recognizing that the whole system is truly indivisible. Leaders need to foster deep collaboration, build authentic, values-driven relationships to create a cohesive, synergistic whole, something that performs way beyond just the sum of its parts. The core insight here is, what happens in one part of your organization reverberates everywhere. So foster radical interconnectedness, shared accountability, because you truly do rise or fall together.
That makes so much sense. It's such a powerful reminder that there's really no such thing as an isolated problem or an isolated success in an organization, is there? Okay, now for the observer effect. This one, I admit, feels quite profound. In quantum physics, the very act of observing a particle, like shining a light on it to see where it is, actually changes its behavior. The observer isn't passive, they're an active participant in creating the reality they're observing. So how does this translate to leadership? What does that mean for a manager or a CEO?
This brings up a really crucial point, doesn't it? What reality are you, as a leader, inadvertently creating with your focus? It underscores the profound responsibility leaders have to be incredibly conscious and intentional about where they direct their attention. What a leader chooses to focus on, what they measure, what they talk about constantly, that creates energy. It signals to the entire organization what is truly important. Think about it. A leader who is constantly focusing on problems, finding fault, highlighting what's wrong, they will inevitably create a problem-focused, maybe even fear-based culture. Conversely, a leader who consistently focuses on possibilities, on strengths, on solutions, on what's working, they will cultivate a culture of innovation, engagement, and forward momentum. So this principle demands that leaders be truly present, aware, understanding that their attitude, their energy, even their quiet assumptions directly impact morale, performance, and creativity across the entire system. The quantum leader leads by actively influencing the cultural field through focused attention and by setting clear, compelling intentions that carry strategic purpose. It's much more than just issuing directives. The core insight, your focus isn't just observation, it's actually an act of creation. So, direct your attention consciously towards possibilities, not just problems, to literally help manifest a more innovative and engaged culture.
That's a powerful and maybe slightly intimidating thought. It puts a huge amount of responsibility on the leader's inner state, their intentionality. Okay, let's move to uncertainty. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle in physics tells us the universe is fundamentally probabilistic, not deterministic. We can't know everything with perfect certainty. So, if we accept that unpredictability is just a given in the universe, why do we keep trying so desperately to eliminate uncertainty in our organizations? What if we embraced it instead?
Well, what's fascinating here is the radical shift in mindset it requires. Moving away from seeking the illusion of control towards embracing a probabilistic way of thinking. A quantum leader has to become comfortable with ambiguity, with complexity, with making decisions even when they don't have all the information, which is most of the time right. Fixating too narrowly on one aspect of a situation, like hitting precise quarterly targets, for instance, can create huge blind spots. You might miss critical factors like shifting market dynamics or new competitor threats popping up. We know from complexity science that truly complex systems are most innovative right at that edge of chaos, that fertile ground between rigid, stifling order and complete unproductive randomness. So instead of fighting for the illusion of control, quantum leaders guide their organizations to actually operate within that dynamic zone. And a big part of that is celebrating intelligent failures, seeing them as valuable data, not mistakes to be punished. Because those failures provide crucial insights into those probabilities we're trying to influence through experimentation and rapid learning. The core insight: stop fighting uncertainty. Try to embrace it as the fertile ground for creativity and adaptation. And view failures as essential data points for learning and evolution, not as career enders.
I really like that idea, moving from control to influence. It feels more realistic. Okay, finally, let's explore quantum tunneling. This one sounds like pure sci-fi. Imagine a particle rolling towards a hill, a barrier it classically doesn't have enough energy to get over. But instead of bouncing off, it just poof, appears on the other side, as if it tunneled straight through. What on earth does this mean for leadership?
Well, this concept inspires what you might call a breakthrough mentality. It's about pushing teams to reframe perceived limitations and overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Leaders often face situations that look like truly impenetrable barriers, right? Deeply entrenched market competitors may be suffocating internal bureaucracy, severe financial constraints. A traditional Newtonian leader sees an unyielding wall. They hit it, maybe try to climb it, often fail. A quantum leader, inspired by this idea of tunneling, looks for an unconventional way to get to the other side. They ask, is there a way through this, not just over or around it? This tunneling mindset involves coaching teams to challenge their deepest seated assumptions, to reframe problems from entirely new angles, and to envision paths where others only see dead ends. It's about cultivating the belief that breakthroughs are possible, even when logic says they shouldn't be. It transforms challenges that would paralyze a traditional organization into opportunities for radical innovation. For example, when faced with a severe resource constraint, a quantum leader might reframe the problem by asking, okay, how could we possibly achieve this outcome with zero budget? That kind of question often sparks truly radical, unexpected solutions. Or they might create things like skunkworks projects, small, independent teams operating outside the normal bureaucratic rules, specifically to tunnel through organizational inertia and deliver breakthroughs quickly. The core insight here: when faced with seemingly impossible barriers, challenge your core assumptions. Look for unconventional tunnels to achieve radical breakthroughs. Don't just accept the wall as solid.
So, thinking about all five of these, how might these profound principles from physics change how you, listening right now, approach challenges and opportunities in your own work or organization? Think about how they contrast with traditional methods. Superposition. That encourages multi-solution thinking instead of just binary A or B choices.
Right.
Entanglement. It demands cross-functional mission teams, breaking down those silos.
Absolutely critical.
The observer effect. It calls for intentional leadership, consciously shifting focus from problems to possibilities.
Huge leverage point.
Uncertainty means replacing rigid plans with adaptive forecasts and actually celebrating learning from failure.
Learning becomes the goal.
And quantum tunneling. It pushes you to challenge constraints, maybe even create those skunkworks projects to bypass inertia for real breakthroughs. It's like a completely different mental toolkit, isn't it? One designed for a complex, unpredictable world. Okay, so if you're really making the shift, viewing your organization not as a machine, but as a living system, then you simply cannot have a static, rigid structure anymore. It just wouldn't fit. This means saying goodbye, maybe painfully for some, to the traditional pyramid structure and embracing something far more fluid, more connected. So what does the structural blueprint actually look like in practice? How do you build it?
Well, the foundational architectural mandate, really the starting point for the quantum organization, is the systematic dismantling of that rigid top-down command and control hierarchy. Bureaucracy, excessive layers of middle management, these are seen not just as inefficient, but as insulators. They block the free flow of energy, information, and innovation throughout the system. The goal is to replace this outdated structure with one that is fundamentally dynamic, modular, and deeply networked. The resulting organization. It looks less like a pyramid and much more like a dynamic ecosystem, or maybe a constellation of interconnected nodes. This ecosystem is composed of small, largely self-organizing teams. They might be called micro-enterprises, squads, circles, pods, the names vary, but the key is they're empowered with a high degree of autonomy. And these teams aren't necessarily permanent fixtures, they're fluid entities. They can form, dissolve, and reform rapidly in response to specific missions, projects, or maybe evolving customer needs.
This structure inherently pushes decision-making authority down to the edges of the organization, closer to the customer, closer to the action where the best, most current information usually resides. And that enables unprecedented agility and responsiveness. Now, a key enabler of making this work at scale is the principle of modularity. This involves identifying repetitive processes or components and creating standardized, reusable modules, whether they're data modules, software services, customer onboarding procedures, whatever. These modules can then be assembled and reassembled in different combinations, kind of like Lego bricks. This prevents the massive complexity of having a completely different bespoke process for every single product or function. It allows the organization to be both efficient and agile, which is the holy grail, right?
Yeah.
So thinking about this structure, their job title, in a quantum organization, it sounds like it becomes much less important than your actual capabilities, what you can do. This seems to be about moving from static roles to a much more dynamic, skills-based architecture. That's a huge shift from how traditional organizations have viewed talent, isn't it?
Oh, it's a fundamental shift in how we view talent. Absolutely. In a traditional Newtonian organization, people are typically defined by their static job descriptions. They're fixed roles within a rigid hierarchy. You are your box on the org chart. The quantum organization flips this paradigm completely. It moves from fixed roles to a dynamic, skills-based talent architecture. The focus is no longer on what specific job title a person holds, but on the evolving portfolio of capabilities they possess, and crucially, how they can deploy those capabilities across the organization as needed. This requires a strategic effort, right? To identify the critical skills needed for the future, to continuously assess the current capabilities of the workforce, and then proactively create pathways for continuous upskilling and reskilling. Lifelong learning becomes embedded, and this approach fundamentally changes the nature of career progression, too. It starts to value horizontal growth, deepening your expertise, acquiring new adjacent skills just as much as traditional vertical promotion up the ladder. Think about the strategic benefit here. When disruption occurs, or when strategies need to pivot quickly, the organization isn't stuck with a workforce full of people tied to obsolete job titles. Instead, it has this fluid pool of talent with transferable skills that can be rapidly redeployed to new challenges and opportunities. This model also naturally supports the creation of an internal talent marketplace, where employees can find new projects, new roles that match their skills and aspirations. That, in turn, boosts engagement, reduces over-reliance on costly, slow external hiring, especially for senior roles. It allows for a continuous strategic evolution of the workforce itself, making it adaptable to pretty much any future challenge.
It really does sound like trying to get a river flowing more freely. You mentioned removing blockages earlier. So what are those boulders, the dams, the things that stop the flow of ideas and energy in most organizations? How does a quantum leader intentionally design the systems, the cultural norms, to really unlock that collective energy and creative potential?
It truly is about intentional design. You have to architect the environment. The first step is often to act as a kind of noticer, or maybe a blockage remover. Actively identifying and ruthlessly eliminating those bureaucratic structures, those complex approval chains, those outdated workflows that everyone knows slows things down and blocks the free flow of energy, ideas, and action. This requires a real mindset of continuous improvement, always aiming to simplify and streamline how work actually gets done, make it easier to do the right thing. Now, quantum organizations are fundamentally learning organizations. So fostering experimentation is absolutely crucial. This requires creating a culture where trying new things is genuinely encouraged, and where failure is reframed consistently as a valuable learning opportunity, not something to be hidden or punished. Leaders have to embrace and protect that fail fast, learn faster ethos. Protect it from the organizational immune system that often seeks to crush anything new or risky. You can do this formally, maybe by establishing innovation labs or protected R&D budgets, or informally, just by creating protected time and space for teams to prototype new ideas without the fear of immediate negative consequences if it doesn't pan out perfectly first time. But perhaps the most critical element, the real bedrock of it all, is the cultivation of psychological safety. This is an environment of deep trust, where individuals feel genuinely safe to be vulnerable, to speak truth to power, to challenge the status quo constructively, and to offer radical half-baked ideas without fear of humiliation, punishment, or retribution. Without psychological safety, authentic collaboration is frankly impossible, and the most creative game-changing ideas will simply never be voiced. They'll die in people's heads. It's the essential nutrient, you could say, for a thriving living system.
That leads to a big one, doesn't it? This idea that you have to do two seemingly opposite things at the same time. You need to be incredibly efficient at what you do now and be incredibly innovative for the future. How do you
Right.
actually pull that off? So many companies seem to struggle with this paradox. They often end up sacrificing long-term innovation for short-term profits or efficiency gains.
This brings us right to a profound question about managing paradox. It's a core leadership challenge. A truly future-proof organization has to master the art of being ambidextrous. That means being capable of simultaneously exploiting its current business model for maximum efficiency and reliability, while also exploring completely new innovations that will secure its future. Doing both at once. The quantum leader resolves this apparent paradox by embracing that both-hand thinking we talked about with superposition. They understand the organization must transform on two dimensions simultaneously. They hold the creative tension between them rather than letting one dominate the other. So this involves a relentless focus on operational efficiency, treating data as a core strategic asset, using it constantly to drive decision-making, maybe fueling AI-driven automation where appropriate. They adopt what's sometimes called a platform mindset, breaking down internal silos to distribute data, processes, technology across the organization to drive efficiency and scale. That's the exploit side. But simultaneously, these organizations are obsessively customer-focused and purpose-driven. That fuels the explore side. They create powerful feedback loops, maybe using tools like net promoter scores, design thinking methods, sentiment analysis to constantly amplify the voice of the customer, to ensure that all innovation efforts are deeply grounded in creating genuine value for real people. The ability to hold these two seemingly opposing forces, efficiency and innovation, exploitation and exploration in a creative dynamic balance, that is a key leadership skill for architecting a truly resilient, future-ready enterprise.
Makes sense. So, thinking about your own situation, what structural changes could unlock more potential in your team or organization? Where are the blockages you see? Where could you maybe encourage more of that both-hand thinking to better balance efficiency with innovation? This architectural redesign, it seems absolutely key to actually embodying these quantum principles in the real world. Okay, theory is great, but you really want to see quantum leadership in action, right? Let's look at Hair, the Chinese appliance giant. They literally blew up their traditional corporate structure. I mean, it is truly jaw-dropping what they did. Back in 2005, they were facing the classic problems: stifling effects of a growing bureaucracy, slow pace of innovation. So their chairman and CEO, Zhang Ruimin, initiated this revolutionary transformation called Ren Danhe, and it was explicitly inspired by quantum and complexity principles. He actually talks about it in those terms.
Yes, and what's truly fascinating here is the sheer audacity of Hare's transformation. It really was nothing short of a complete deconstruction of the traditional corporate model. They eliminated their entire functional hierarchy, removed something like 12,000 middle managers, people who were seen as a barrier, an insulating layer, between the employees actually doing the work and the customers. The entire company was shattered, broken down into more than 4,000 self-managing micro-enterprises, or MEs. Each ME, typically just 10-15 employees, operates essentially as an independent startup. They have full autonomy over their own strategy, their budget, their hiring decisions, even their compensation structure. And crucially, each ME has its own profit and loss statement, its own P&L, making it directly accountable for its market performance. This is just a direct, radical embodiment of decentralization and interconnectedness. It created a true living system at a massive global scale.
Wow. Okay, so how did those quantum principles we discussed, superposition, entanglement, observer effect, uncertainty, how did they actually manifest in such a radical structural transformation like Hare's?
Well, the Rindenhai model is pretty much the epitome of a self-organizing system. There's no big top-down centralized strategy dictating exactly what everyone should do. Instead, each ME sets its own direction based on the explicit evolving needs of its users or its internal customers. Leadership isn't eliminated, but it's radically distributed throughout the organization. Their empowering goal is literally to make everyone a CEO in their own sphere. That's self-organization. For radical interconnectedness, these MEs, they aren't isolated islands floating around. They dynamically form what Hare calls ecosystem micro-communities, EMCs. These are temporary alliances to collaborate on complex projects or solutions that no single ME could possibly handle alone. Furthermore, even the internal support functions like HR, finance, IT, they were also converted into MEs. These platform MEs actually have to compete for the business of the customer-facing MEs. It creates this vibrant internal market that drives efficiency and service quality across the entire enterprise. That's entanglement in action. And for the observer effect and user centricity. Well, the very name Ren-Dan-Hai itself translates roughly to aligning the value created for the employee, Ren, directly with the value created for the user, Dan. So the compensation of every single employee within an ME is directly linked to the market success and user satisfaction of their products or services. They aren't paid to please bosses up the chain, they're paid to create user value, period. This creates what they call zero distance to the user. The entire organization is constantly observing and responding to the customer field in real time. And the outcomes of this radical experiment, they've been pretty extraordinary. Hare has achieved sustained annual growth of around 23% since fully implementing the model. That's during a period when many global competitors struggle significantly. The company has also shown remarkable resilience. For example, remember early COVID-19 in China? Hare was able to return to full production just weeks after the initial outbreak, largely thanks to the adaptability of its decentralized network structure.
That is just an astonishing level of structural change. Incredible story. Now let's contrast that with Microsoft. Their transformation under Satya Nadella, starting around 2014, wasn't so much about dismantling physical structures, was it? It was more about dismantling a deeply ingrained and frankly quite toxic culture. When Nadella became CEO, Microsoft was seen as this fragmented behemoth, bogged down by a notoriously toxic, internally competitive, know-it-all culture. Different divisions were practically at war with each other. A fixed mindset really stifled collaboration and innovation.
Right, and this brings up such a critical question about where transformation truly begins. Is it structure first or culture first? Nadella, with what seems like profound insight, recognized that the core problem wasn't necessarily the strategy or the technology. Microsoft had plenty of smart people and good tech. The core problem was the culture. So he initiated this deep cultural transformation, a profound rewiring of the corporate brain, you could say. And it was centered on three core pillars: empathy, fostering a growth mindset, and driving a one Microsoft philosophy of radical collaboration. His personal mantra became famous: ideas excite me, empathy grounds and centers me. That signaled a radical departure from the company's aggressive, often internally cutthroat past. Microsoft's journey really powerfully shows that a profound shift in values, in empathy, and adopting a learn-it-all mindset that can literally rewire the corporate brain and lead to incredible, tangible business outcomes.
So how do we see those quantum principles we've been talking about reflected in Microsoft's cultural renaissance? Where's the quantum connection there?
Well, the transformation was clearly driven from the inside out. It began with a fundamental shift in individual and collective consciousness. That strong emphasis on empathy, the ability to genuinely see the world from another person's perspective, understand their needs and feelings, that's a direct application of the quantum principles of interconnectedness and holism, isn't it? Seeing the connections between people. It required leaders and employees alike to actively develop their emotional intelligence, EQ, and arguably their spiritual intelligence, SQ too, fostering a sense of shared humanity and purpose beyond just shipping code. For fostering interconnectedness, that whole One Microsoft initiative was a direct assault on the silos that had historically defined and damaged the company. It forced divisions like Windows, Office, and the emerging Azure cloud business to stop competing fiercely internally and actually start collaborating. Recognizing that their fates were deeply entangled, that they needed each other to succeed, and this collaborative approach even extended externally. Remember how Microsoft used to view Linux as a cancer? Under Nadella, they shifted to strategically partnering with former rivals, recognizing a larger interconnected ecosystem. And then, for embracing uncertainty and learning. Well, the most famous element of the transformation was that deliberate shift from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture. This is just a perfect embodiment of the quantum principles of embracing uncertainty and seeing challenges not as threats, but as opportunities for growth and learning. It fostered deep curiosity across the company. It encouraged rapid experimentation. And crucially, it worked hard to create the psychological safety needed for people to actually learn from failures, rather than hiding them or blaming others. The results: absolutely spectacular. Microsoft's cultural renaissance led to an unprecedented business resurgence. The company's market cap soared. They successfully pivoted to become a dominant force in cloud computing with Azure, even though they were relatively late entering that market. This transformation really demonstrated that a profound shift in collective consciousness in the software of the organization can be just as powerful, if not sometimes more powerful, than a formal structural hardware overhaul.
These two cases, Hair and Microsoft, they really reveal a crucial truth when you put them side by side, don't they? Hair demonstrates radical structural change, a complete rewiring of the organizational hardware. The roles, the incentives, the power dynamics.
Right, the tangible stuff.
Well, Microsoft exemplifies a profound consciousness change, rewiring the organizational software, the mindset, the values, the relational norms. It seems like a truly successful quantum transformation requires a kind of dual-pronged, entangled approach. You need both architectural redesign and the cultivation of this new leadership consciousness. The hardware and the software have to evolve together.
That is absolutely the core takeaway here. You can't really sustain one without the other. A purely structural change, like Hair's, without a corresponding shift in the underlying mindset and culture. It would likely be rejected eventually by the organization's powerful cultural immune system. People would find ways to revert back. Conversely, a change in mindset, like Microsoft focused on, without reinforcing structural changes, changes to performance management, rewards, decision rights, that initial enthusiasm would eventually wither as people revert back to the behaviors dictated by the old misaligned system. The structure shape behavior too. Therefore, the ultimate blueprint for a successful, sustainable quantum transformation really seems to be this dual-pronged, entangled approach. It requires the kind of architectural redesign exemplified by Hair and the cultivation of a new leadership consciousness as demonstrated so powerfully by Microsoft. They're inextricably interdependent. You need both.
So think about this. Which of these incredible transformations, the structural revolution at Hair or the cultural renaissance at Microsoft, which one resonates more with the challenges or maybe the opportunities that you've observed in your own professional life? It really highlights that there's no single magic bullet path, but maybe both aspects are essential in the long run. Okay, this all sounds potentially transformative, but how do you actually start this journey? Where does the rubber meet the road? It sounds like it begins with you, the leader.
Right.
It has to be an inner transformation first. You can't really architect a quantum organization if you yourself are still operating from a purely Newtonian mindset. So what are the first concrete steps for this inner journey?
Yes, this initial phase is absolutely critical. It's about developing the internal capacity, the inner wiring, to lead in this radically new way. And that commitment to self-awareness is paramount. It's the foundation. So the first action is really to embrace reflective practices, things like mindfulness, meditation, maybe journaling. Now, these aren't just, feel-good exercises for stress relief, although they can help with that too. They are powerful tools to help you uncover your hidden biases, understand your emotional triggers, and identify those deeply ingrained mental models that might be unconsciously limiting your leadership effectiveness. Seeing your own programming. The second action is to actively work on developing all three of those intelligences we discussed, IQ, EQ, and CQ. For EQ, maybe seek out honest 360-degree feedback to really understand your impact on others and identify specific areas for development. How do you actually show up? For CQ, maybe intentionally engage in activities that connect you to a deeper sense of purpose and your core values. That can be through community service, coaching, or mentoring others, or engaging in really deep strategic dialogue of the why behind the work. And finally, the third action for this interface is to consciously shift how you communicate. Try to lead with inquiry, not just advocacy. Make a deliberate shift. Train yourself to move away from that default mode of always providing answers, defending your position, being the expert, towards asking powerful, fundamental questions. Practice humble inquiry. Practice appreciative inquiry. Genuinely seek to understand diverse perspectives before you form a judgment or offer a solution. This models the curiosity and openness that the entire organization needs to cultivate. Without this foundational shift in your own consciousness, any effort to architect a quantum organization will likely falter or feel inauthentic.
Okay, that makes sense. Start with yourself. Once you've begun that inner work, the next logical step seems to be radiating that new consciousness, that new way of being out to your immediate team. How do you start creating an environment where everyone feels safe enough to truly connect, contribute their best ideas, maybe even challenge things?
Right. This brings us to a really crucial point. How do you actually move from that traditional command and control environment, which might feel safer in the short term, to one of genuine collaboration and emergent solutions, where the best ideas can bubble up from anywhere? It requires the active, deliberate cultivation of trust and vulnerability. You have to change the very dynamics of interaction within the team.
So the first action here is to prioritize dialogue over directives. Intentionally create spaces and time for open two-way conversations that go way beyond just simple status updates. Use team meetings, maybe even dedicated sessions, to explore uncertainty together. Pose complex challenges and facilitate a collective sense-making process rather than just issuing top-down directives and expecting compliance. Ask more, tell less. The second action is to actively build psychological safety. Now, this isn't a passive state. It doesn't just happen. It requires consistent, conscious effort from the leader. You have to model vulnerability yourself, admit your own mistakes, talk about your own uncertainties. That gives permission for others to do the same. You have to explicitly celebrate the learning that comes from intelligent failures. Actively protect team members who take calculated risks, even if they don't pan out. And it's also critical to explicitly reward and recognize what's sometimes called constructive deviance, when employees courageously challenge the status quo, but do it in a way that ultimately benefits the organization. Don't shoot the messenger. And the third action here is to reframe complexity. When the team inevitably faces a difficult challenge or a setback, and they will show, the leader's role is to help reframe it. Instead of treating it like an insurmountable obstacle or a disaster, frame it as an opportunity for an emergent solution. Ask questions like, okay, what else might be true here? Or, what new possibility does this unexpected situation open up for us? Shift the team's perspective from purely problem solving towards possibility creation.
Right. From inner work to team dynamics, now we get to the structural stuff, the organizational design. This can seem maybe the most daunting part, but the roadmap seems to suggest starting small, proving the concept, making a tangible impact, and then scaling from there. This involves actually rewiring the corporate brain structurally. Where do we begin with that?
Exactly. This phase is about creating a microcosm, a little pocket, of the quantum future right within your existing organization. Build a proof point. So the first action is typically to launch a pilot team. Instead of attempting some massive, disruptive, company-wide reorganization right off the bat, which is incredibly risky, select a single, meaningful business problem or maybe a specific customer journey, and then charter a dedicated, cross-functional, self-organizing pilot team to tackle it end-to-end. You can even use the Hare microenterprise as a kind of model. Give the team a crystal clear mission, give them end-to-end accountability, and critically, give them as much autonomy as realistically possible to figure out how to deliver the outcome. The second action, and this is crucial for the leader, is to run interference and flatten the hierarchy for this pilot team. Your role here is vital. You have to protect this fragile pilot team from the existing bureaucracy, from the organizational antibodies that will try to shut it down. Actively identify and remove unnecessary layers of approval, pointless reporting requirements, other procedural hurdles that will just slow the team down and sap their energy. This act of temporarily flattening the organization just for the pilot team demonstrates the benefits of the new model tangibly and often quite quickly. People see it working. And the third action is to implement adaptive processes specifically for this pilot team. So for this team, replace those rigid annual plans and budgets with more agile, iterative processes. Maybe use frameworks like objectives and key results, OKRs, perhaps on a quarterly cycle. Encourage a regular rhythm of experimentation, rapid measurement of results, and continuous learning loops, things like weekly or bi-weekly retrospectives, to really institutionalize adaptation within that team. By demonstrating clear, measurable success with a pilot, you start to build internal champions. You provide compelling evidence that this new way of working isn't just some theoretical fantasy. It's not only possible, but demonstrably superior for certain kinds of challenges.
Okay, but this isn't just a one-and-done project, is it? You run a pilot, great. But then what? It sounds like the real goal is embedding these quantum principles deep into the very DNA of the organization, making it a new way of being, not just a project. It's about sustaining the flow, ensuring continuous evolution.
Exactly right. This is not a program with an end date. The ultimate goal isn't just to adapt to the current wave of change, but to build an organization that actually gets stronger in the face of constant change. To become, as Nassim Taleb calls it, anti-fragile. Anti-fragile means not just bouncing back from shocks, that's resilience, but actually improving, getting more robust when exposed to volatility and uncertainty. So the first action in this sustaining phase is to build systemic feedback loops. Use technology, use data analytics to create systems that allow the organization to sense and respond to its internal and external environment much closer to real time. This needs to move way beyond just traditional lagging financial reporting. Think about real-time dashboards on customer sentiment, employee engagement levels, project velocity, market signals, a richer picture of reality. The second action is to relentlessly champion a culture of continuous learning. make upskilling and reskilling not just an HR initiative, but a core strategic priority across the entire organization. Invest seriously in development programs that build not just technical skills, but also those core quantum competencies we've discussed. Systems thinking, emotional intelligence, radical adaptability. Foster that learn-it-all culture where unlearning old habits and relearning new approaches are actively celebrated as core strengths, not signs of weakness. And the third action, finally, is to scale what works. Based on the real learnings and successes from your initial pilots, develop a thoughtful strategy to scale the new model. Now, this might not mean applying the exact same structure everywhere across the whole company. That might not make sense. But it means applying the underlying principles, self-organization, networked collaboration, adaptive processes to other parts of the organization in a way that fits their specific context, their specific needs. This ensures the continuous evolution of the entire enterprise, adapting the model as you scale it.
So, listening to this roadmap, what's one tangible step you could take, maybe even today or this week, to start your own quantum leadership journey? Whether it's an inner shift, like scheduling 15 minutes for reflection, or a small change in your team, like asking more open questions in your next meeting, the roadmap provides a pretty practical checklist, doesn't it? Moving from not started to maybe emerging and eventually embedded across these crucial phrases of inner work, team culture, organizational design, and continuous evolution. Okay, it all sounds amazing, potentially game-changing, but you might still be thinking, hang on, is this just a bunch of fluffy pseudoscientific jargon? Using terms from quantum physics for business, it can sound a bit suspect. It's a fair question, right? And one we definitely need to address. This critique is often leveled against quantum leadership, accusing it of basically just superficially borrowing cool-sounding language from physics without real substance.
Yeah, it's a common critique, and it's important to clarify this point. Are we literally applying quantum physics equations to business strategy? No, of course not. Not in a direct physical sense. These concepts from physics are being used as powerful metaphors. The strength of quantum leadership lies in using these metaphors to describe and understand complex organizational dynamics that are otherwise really difficult to articulate using traditional business language. We're drawing parallels between these strange, unexpected quantum behaviors and the often counterintuitive, emergent complexities we see in human social systems all the time. Now, the model's true scientific grounding isn't really in quantum physics itself, is more accurately rooted in the well-established field of complexity science. And complexity science provides robust theoretical and empirical validation for viewing organizations precisely as complex adaptive systems. So there is real science behind the core idea. However, a more substantive challenge, I think, is that the specific concept of quantum leadership itself, while promising, can still be a bit vaguely defined in some of the academic literature. There isn't one single, universally accepted dominant definition yet. And the research methods used to identify its core components aren't always crystal clear. This lack of a really concrete, universally agreed-upon framework can make the concept feel a bit slippery, maybe difficult for very pragmatic leaders to grab onto easily, and that can certainly hinder its widespread adoption. Leaders who are really keen on applying it might need to invest a bit more time in internalizing the nuanced underlying theory behind the metaphors.
Okay, fair enough. So even if it's not strictly pseudoscience, we know that changing deeply ingrained ways of thinking and operating is just incredibly hard for individuals and for organizations. People generally like certainty, predictability, and quantum leadership, almost by definition, embraces uncertainty. How do organizations realistically overcome this inherent human resistance to such a profound paradigm shift?
This really brings the human element front and center, doesn't it? The paradigm shift is deeply challenging, precisely because it asks people, often very successful people, to fundamentally unlearn decades of ingrained habits and assumptions. Moving away from comfortable linear thought processes towards an embrace of complexity, ambiguity, interconnectedness. That's a shift that many find deeply counterintuitive, even threatening, especially individuals who have really thrived and been rewarded within traditional hierarchical Newtonian structures. Why change what worked for them? And this natural resistance is often compounded by one of the model's inherent features, its intentional lack of rigid step-by-step guidelines. Unlike traditional management models that often offer clear prescriptive frameworks, detailed playbooks, just tell me what to do, quantum leadership is intentionally designed to be flexible, adaptive, context-dependent. But for leaders accustomed to those well-defined manuals and clear instructions, this very ambiguity can paradoxically become a major barrier. They might find the open-ended nature of the approach itself to be a source of frustration rather than a source of creative potential. Overcoming this deep-seated resistance, it requires relentless communication about the why, patient coaching, celebrating small wins consistently to build momentum and trust, and demonstrating the benefits tangibly, like with those pilots we discussed. It's a long game.
Right. And then there's the practical side. If everything is becoming more fluid, more self-organizing, doesn't that risk making things, well, chaotic, maybe inefficient? When you need a clear, fast decision, who's truly in charge in a quantum organization? Embracing uncertainty, a core tenet, surely comes with inherent risks too.
Absolutely. And it's important to be clear-eyed about the trade-offs here. While operating at that edge of chaos is indeed where the most creativity often happens, it's also inherently unpredictable by nature. Viewing the organization as a dynamic, living system means accepting that even small changes, small interventions, can sometimes lead to major, unpredictable shifts in behavior and outcomes. That's the nature of complex systems. This can be destabilizing, especially initially. And it makes traditional long-term forecasting extremely difficult, if not impossible. Leaders need to be highly adept at navigating this unpredictability, making decisions based on emerging patterns in real-time data rather than just sticking rigidly to outdated plans. That's a skill that is both rare and quite difficult to develop. Furthermore, the model's strong emphasis on decentralization and shared leadership can definitely be problematic in certain contexts. A purely decentralized model might be completely inappropriate or even dangerous in highly regulated industries. Think finance, healthcare, aerospace, where strict compliance and clear accountability are paramount. Or think about crisis situations that require rapid, unambiguous, centralized command and control decisions. Sometimes hierarchy is necessary. The free-flowing interaction and collaborative decision-making that define the quantum approach can also challenge individuals who are more accustomed to, and maybe even prefer, the clarity and perceived safety of traditional hierarchical roles and boundaries. Not everyone thrives in ambiguity, so skillfully balancing autonomy with accountability and knowing when to temporarily centralize decisions in critical situations versus when to let the system self-organize, that becomes a vital, nuanced leadership capability.
Okay, so let's say you buy into the philosophy, you understand the challenges. But then, who are these quantum leaders? Do they even exist in sufficient numbers? And how do you find them, or maybe more realistically, develop them? This feels like a significant practical barrier, what's often called the quantum talent and skills gap.
Yes, this is a very significant practical barrier right now. We often hear about the talent gap in actual quantum computing technology, but the skills gap extends metaphorically right into the leadership realm. There is, arguably, a profound shortage of leaders who currently possess that integrated blend of intelligence's IQ, EQ, and CQ, along with the deep systems thinking mindset required to be truly effective quantum leaders. And organizations face numerous hurdles in trying to close this gap. These can include relying on outdated technology platforms that actually hinder collaboration and real-time data analysis, making quantum principles harder to implement. There are often budgetary restrictions that limit investment in the kind of deep experiential training and development needed to build these capabilities. And sometimes there's just a simple lack of internal skills in critical enabling areas like advanced data science, facilitating deep dialogue, building emotional intelligence capabilities, or developing truly adaptive strategy processes. Many traditional leadership development programs, frankly, remain too generic. They often fail to build the specific, human-centric, soft skills, which are actually the hard skills now, that are the hallmark of the quantum leader. Without a strategic, sustained investment in cultivating these new capabilities across the leadership pipeline, any attempt to implement a quantum model is likely destined to struggle or stall out. This really means reevaluating learning and development budgets, prioritizing experiences that build these integrated intelligences, maybe partnering with external experts or coaches to accelerate skill development in these crucial areas.
So, as you consider this for yourself or your organization, what potential pitfalls should you be most aware of? Are these challenges, the jargon accusation, the resistance to change, the risks of unpredictability, the talent gap, are they manageable in your specific context? It's really important to acknowledge that this isn't some magic wand, not a walk in the park. But the potential rewards in terms of adaptability and innovation seem significant for those willing to navigate the complexities and brave the journey. Okay, let's shift our gaze forward a bit. Looking ahead, the relentless rise of AI, advanced automation, it's undeniably going to fundamentally change what it means to be a leader, what skills are valued. And quantum leadership, interestingly, seems almost perfectly positioned as the human-centric answer to an increasingly technology-saturated world. As AI takes over more of the routine, the analytical, the technical tasks, the value of human contribution seems set to shift dramatically, doesn't it?
I think that's exactly right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the skills that are proving most difficult to automate things, like deep empathy, fostering genuine creativity, exercising complex ethical judgment, facilitating nuanced collaborative problem solving, inspiring a shared sense of purpose. These are precisely the capabilities that lie right at the heart of quantum leadership. So in the coming decade, maybe even sooner, the primary role of a leader will likely not be to manage tasks efficiently, or even necessarily to be the smartest person in the room on purely technical matters. AI might handle much of that. Instead, the leader's crucial role will be to create and nurture a harmonious, effective relationship between human ingenuity and machine intelligence. The quantum leader will be the one who can ask the right questions of the AI, interpret its outputs with wisdom and contextual understanding, and skillfully weave its powerful analytical capabilities into a deeply human-centric culture of innovation, collaboration, and psychological safety. By 2030, I suspect leadership effectiveness will be increasingly defined by this blend. Strong digital literacy, combined with exceptionally high emotional intelligence, radical adaptability, and unwavering commitment to inclusive, ethical, values-based leadership, all of which are core tenets of the quantum model. It really does feel like the necessary human-centric counterbalance to a world increasingly driven by technology.
That's a compelling vision. And for a glimpse maybe even further into the future, the structural principles we've been discussing in quantum organizations, decentralization, networks, autonomy, they actually seem to point towards something even more radical. Decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs. These are things like internet native organizations, often collectively owned and managed by their members, with rules and decisions encoded and executed transparently on a blockchain. They could represent the ultimate structural manifestation of these quantum principles.
It's a fascinating potential endpoint, isn't it? What's really interesting here is how quantum leadership principles seem to build the necessary human software, the culture, the trust, the shared purpose that would be absolutely required for these radically decentralized hardware platforms like DAOs to actually operate effectively. DAOs, in theory, represent the ultimate structural manifestation of quantum ideals. Fully decentralized, transparent, community-governed, truly autonomous. Now, let's be clear. DAOs are still a very emerging and experimental form of organization. They face significant challenges right now around legal status, security, governance, scalability, regulatory scrutiny. It's early days, but they offer a powerful glimpse into a potential future of governance and distributed organization. And the cultural groundwork laid by quantum leadership, cultivating distributed leadership capabilities, fostering a strong shared purpose, building high levels of trust and psychological safety, embedding stakeholder accountability. This groundwork is arguably the necessary prerequisite for DAO-like structures to function effectively, whether within a traditional corporate context or as standalone entities. So, quantum leadership could be seen as the bridge, the human system's development needed to cross from today's often rigid hierarchies towards tomorrow's potential for truly autonomous and networked enterprises. It shows how these principles might eventually scale to a whole new level.
So in this world of perpetual disruption, constant change, what's the one thing, the ultimate source of advantage that might actually give you a lasting edge? It's probably not a specific product, right? Or a particular technology. Because any competitive advantage derived purely from those seems inherently transient. Someone else will copy it, leapfrog it eventually.
This leads us right to the ultimate question, perhaps. What is the enduring legacy of the quantum leader? What do they build that lasts? I believe it's the creation of that anti-fragile organization we talked about, one that doesn't just survive the future, but actively thrives, learns, and gets stronger because of the uncertainty it faces. The only durable, truly future-proof competitive advantage in the long run is probably the organization's intrinsic capacity to learn, adapt, and evolve faster and more effectively than its surrounding environment. Quantum leaders are the architects of precisely this adaptive capacity. By consciously moving beyond the old mechanistic frameworks of the past and embracing this new consciousness, this new way of seeing and being, the quantum leader cultivates the organization as a living system. By fostering that culture of possibility, that radical interconnectedness, that deep psychological safety, and that relentless drive for continuous learning, they build an enterprise that is not just resilient to shocks, but is genuinely anti-fragile, one that actually gets stronger, more capable, more innovative when exposed to volatility and unforeseen challenges. The ultimate goal, then, isn't to build an organization that is perfectly prepared for some predictable future that will never arrive. It's to build one that is capable of co-creating a desirable future, adapting and shaping its path no matter what challenges emerge. It's about unleashing the boundless, latent potential of the human system within the organization.
So, thinking about all this, how do you see your own role evolving in a world increasingly shaped by AI, by automation, and potentially by the kind of decentralization we've just discussed today? It's a lot to ponder. Hashtag tag outro. Wow. Okay, that was a genuinely deep dive, wasn't it? We've covered a huge amount of ground. We've journeyed all the way from the predictable cogs of the old Newtonian machine to the dynamic, sometimes weird possibilities of the quantum living system. We've seen how these profound principles from physics, superposition, entanglement, the observer effect, uncertainty, tunneling can actually inspire practical breakthroughs in leadership thinking. And we looked at how real companies like Hair with its radical structure and Microsoft with its cultural renaissance are already making this shift in tangible ways. We talked about that core shift from rigid hierarchy to flexible networks, from fixed roles to dynamic capabilities, and the absolutely critical importance of fostering innovation and psychological safety. We also explored that dual need. You need both structural change and a shift in consciousness. And we acknowledged the significant challenges on this path, from fighting the pseudoscience label to dealing with resistance, managing unpredictability, and bridging that talent gap. It's definitely a challenging path, no doubt about it, but it's one that seems to promise incredible resilience, greater innovation, and maybe ultimately more human flourishing within our organizations. And it really reframes the goal, doesn't it? It's not about preparing for a predictable future, but about building the capacity to co-create a desirable one, whatever may come our way.
Absolutely. And perhaps this leaves us with an important, maybe even provocative question for you, the listener, to take away. If your organization, your team, could truly embrace these quantum principles fully, allowing itself to become genuinely self-organizing, deeply interconnected, and relentlessly purpose-driven, what currently impossible problems might it suddenly find ways to solve? What completely new possibilities, things you haven't even imagined yet, could emerge from that fluid, energized, interconnected state?
We really hope this deep dive has given you a fresh perspective, maybe sparked some new ideas, and perhaps offered some actionable insights you can start experimenting with. We definitely encourage you to try looking at your own professional world, your team, your leadership style through this new quantum lens. Take a peek. What hidden connections do you suddenly notice? What Newtonian habits are holding things back? And what quantum possibilities might be waiting to be unleashed?